What is up, my AP students? Hope everybody is doing well and feeling fine here on a Friday afternoon. Just wanted to start these recap videos again for what we've been doing in class over the last week and maybe a couple classes previous to that for this one, so it might get a little long. But good to do a little recap before I head to Green Bay, Wisconsin and Lambeau Field to watch my Green Bay Packers take on their arch rivals, the Chicago Bears, on Sunday Night Football. Very, very excited. And we also have a little bit of the Christmas spirit going on with a nice big old tree next to me here, all decorated and looking nice. So yeah, just wanted to take you through what we've been doing and everything, and hope these videos continue to help you. So where are we in U.S. history? Basically, we covered the rise of the Republican Party that happens in the 1850s with John C. Fremont running for president of the United States and actually doing quite well as a Republican. So the rise of the Republican Party, which eventually leads to Abraham Lincoln and the election of 1860. The election of 1860 is a quite controversial one. Abraham Lincoln receiving 0 votes in any of the southern states. However, winning the presidency. The Confederacy under President Jefferson Davis had threatened to secede if Abraham Lincoln had won the presidency, which obviously happened. So the South decides to leave, with South Carolina leaving first, which is, quite important that it's South Carolina leaving first. So yes, the South has now left the Union after the election of Lincoln. We took a look at some SAQs here on Friday that try to describe the differences in what historians thought were the cause of the Civil War. Now, we, of course, know that it is slavery, a state's right to what? To own another person is the idea here. But essentially, we went through 2 different historical interpretations of how the Civil War actually occurred or what the cause was. And we saw sectional conflict. We saw the fall of political parties that were once able to compromise with things like the Three-Fifths Compromise, the Compromise of 1820, the Missouri Compromise, Kansas, Nebraska, and popular sovereignty, which is obviously its own issue and everything, with bleeding Kansas and people going into Kansas to try to vote to make it a free state versus a slave state, which then leads to some conflicts. But all causes of the Civil War in failure to compromise there. So we did an SAQ and everything. But yes, the South is leaving. We went through some major problems and issues within the Civil War itself. We know that the Confederacy did quite well at the beginning of the war. You all planned battle strategies that were actually quite similar to what the Confederates were looking to do, looking to threaten the North, hoping for maybe a long drawn-out war, or if they could threaten Washington, D.C., that they would be able to get the North, the Union, to compromise, to sign a treaty if they had been able to threaten them. The Union doesn't do so hot at the beginning of the war, mostly due to the lack of aggressiveness of Abraham Lincoln's head generals. The one we focused on the most was a guy named George McClellan, who eventually runs against Abraham Lincoln in the election of 1864, in which Lincoln, wins quite easily, even though there was a bit of, issue and conflict that maybe the Northerners didn't totally support Lincoln and what was happening within the Union at the time. Remember, about half the Union or so didn't really support the war. They saw this as more of an economic issue than an ethical issue. We will come back to that momentarily. Our major things that we focused on in the Civil War itself was obviously Southern secession. That's a big one. And the first act of violence in the war at Fort Sumner, South Carolina, and Charleston Harbor, where I've been, as I've explained, and had an interesting interaction with the tour guide and correcting him on what flags are which flags, because I'm me, and of course I would do something like that. But yeah, so Fort Sumner in the beginning of the war, and the Confederates doing quite well. Our first battle of the war, the Battle of Bull Run, shows that the Confederacy is going to be able to hang in this thing maybe longer than the Union had originally assumed. The Union plan for war of blockading the South, essentially trying to slowly choke out their economy, at first is seen as ineffective. Again, the South doing quite well at the beginning. As the blockade eventually gets more effective as the years go on, and slowly but surely drains out the Anaconda Plan, right? Drains out the Southern economy, which is really the important part of that, proposed by Winfield Scott. Other important battles that we had focused on and issues were the Battle of Gettysburg and the battles of Antietam. Antietam being the bloodiest day in the war, which then leads Lincoln to the Emancipation Proclamation, something we covered on Friday as well, which frees all slaves in areas rebelling against the United States of America, not in the North itself. Most of the Union states had already outlawed slavery individually, so it's not like this was anything new for them. However, in order to keep the border states from jumping to the Confederacy and to prevent a European power such as England from jumping into the Confederate side, Lincoln essentially makes this war about slavery with the Emancipation Proclamation, all a result of the Battle of Antietam. Remember, he had to look for some momentum there before he was going to do something drastic like make the war about slavery itself. We also covered, again, the Battle of Gettysburg, Gettysburg being the bloodiest battle of the entire war, and it really the transition point of everything. It's the last time that the Confederacy is going to invade the North in general. It's pretty much the only time that they threaten Washington, D.C. In the entire war. So the Union able to win that is a huge, huge deal, and they got a massive assist from just pure luck, finding Robert E. Lee's battle plans and seeing that he had split up his army into smaller segments allowed the Union to be more aggressive at the Battle of Gettysburg, leading to massive casualties is really the problem. Remember, we had assessed why there was so much death in the Civil War itself, and it's a combination of generals that are still using old tactics in war, Napoleonic tactics with new weapons, such as machine guns, the Gatling gun, and more accurate rifles. And that in combination with the absolute terrible medical care of the time period. Again, I had said if I was a Civil War soldier at the time, I would have worn a sign around my neck that said, if I am shot or injured, please do not touch me. You had a much better chance of surviving, or at least it would have been a painless death, rather than doctors doing things such as amputations or causing infection. So that's why so much death in the war, specifically at Antietam and Gettysburg. Remember, the Union had thought that this might have been quite a quick conflict, so they're not as aggressive at the beginning. It's only until President Lincoln and one of his fanboys, one of his favorite people, Ulysses Simpson Grant, get together that this war becomes quite bloody. Ulysses Simpson Grant was charged with taking the Mississippi River, which, as we know, is absolutely critical for this war effort. So Ulysses Simpson Grant does a really great job out on the western portion of this war in securing the Mississippi River for the Union and taking the city of New Orleans, which is an absolutely devastating blow to the Confederacy. This then leads to Ulysses Simpson Grant, right-hand man, General Sherman, marching all the way from Atlanta, Georgia to Savannah, Georgia, and then from Savannah, Georgia into South Carolina, burning and destroying as we go. Sherman's march to the sea. It's really seen as like a punishment for the Confederacy and also to destroy their psychological mindset is really the idea there. Anyways, the war continues to go on until 1865, until at Appomattox Courthouse, General Lee is finally forced to surrender to Ulysses S. Grant. Remember, Robert Lincoln, Abraham Lincoln's son, is actually in attendance there at Appomattox Courthouse, which is our final event of the Civil War. So the war is over. We'd gone through all the major battles and everything that would ever be asked on you on the exam. But yeah, so a slow, drawn out war at the beginning. I think the AP guideline itself specifically spells out that the South did actually a pretty good job of staying in this thing, and it's a lack of Union generals' aggression, just using their sheer population to wipe out the Confederacy that really should have happened in this thing. We then looked at documents and politics during the Civil War. Remember, that's also an AP highlight, is politics during the Civil War. We looked at the Emancipation Proclamation, which I had mentioned earlier in this video. We also looked at the Gettysburg Address, which shows American and national identity like no tomorrow. The idea that we are now charged with this duty of honoring the people that have died in the Civil War and not letting their deaths, essentially go in vain, and instead honoring them by creating a country that actually recognizes its original goals, which was to treat everybody equally, to give everybody an equal say in government, those classic Americana, idealism. Now, is that actually true? Is that what happens after the Civil War? Absolutely not. But, the Gettysburg Address does do a really good job of summing up, what was this all about and what is this for and how are we going to move forward after something like this? Lastly, on Friday, we got into the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Something that obviously you could see in class makes me a bit emotional. But Abraham Lincoln is shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth at Ford's Theater. We went through the whole story of that and everything that had occurred, and essentially that the South and the North had the similar reaction to the death of Lincoln, which is absolute devastation. They were incredibly upset. Obviously, the South, it now looks even worse for you. Not only have you led to the death of 700,000 Americans, not only have you rebelled against your country and be considered traitors, you are now not directly, but pretty much indirectly responsible for the death of who many people consider the greatest president in the history of America, Abraham Lincoln. We went through, the entire side story of that and everything that went down, post-assassination with the capturing of John Wilkes Booth. But most of that doesn't usually get asked about. It's really those documents we focused on. The last document we really focused on was the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, which outlaws slavery except for punishment as a crime. One of the things that you guys are going to see as we move forward into this class, into our next little topic, which is about Reconstruction, how are we actually going to stitch the country back together, is that Lincoln actually had a pretty, lenient policy, at least thoughts, on how he was going to handle the Confederacy coming back into the country. And his death and the rise of President Andrew Johnson, his vice president, leads to a much more harsher punishment on the South. But the 13th Amendment, the 14th Amendment, and the 15th Amendment are known as the Civil War Amendments or the Reconstruction Amendments, and we basically focus on how the South uses loopholes in those amendments to keep the ideas of slavery going. We're going to get into this idea of Jim Crow laws and how essentially black Americans, even though it says specifically black men are given the right to vote in the 15th Amendment, and in the 14th Amendment that everybody who is a citizen of the United States, including women, which we don't even get into until 1920, which we'll talk about this, but ridiculous, that women are still not given their place in society, are going to find loopholes in this to essentially keep slavery going, not allow black America to vote, not allow them to get representation, and keep them down sort of economically and politically, while also, keep slavery going with that hole in the 13th Amendment. But yeah, so that's pretty much what we've done over this entire week in AP US history. The focus on the Civil War is absolutely critical. I had told you that entire packet I gave you was a star, exclamation point. So make sure we have those for class on Tuesday. Anyways, I hope everybody has a great weekend. I will see you all on Tuesday, hopefully with a Green Bay Packers victory and a massive smile on my face. So have a great weekend. Let me know if you have any questions or problems or anything, and I'll totally help you out. See you later.